Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar with the objective to gain some insights into new approaches to your infrastructure. I'm George Brifford and I'm a Research Director at Financial Services Insights with IDC. With me, I've got Peter Cooper, Adrian Ip and Bill Fennick. And these gentlemen, they will have time to introduce themselves in depth a little bit later on. But what I thought would be a good idea is to start off this webinar with some sort of a market overview of the industry. What are the perspectives? Do we see any trends? And basically, what is going on in the industry? I'm going to share with you a pell-mell of slides which relate both to the US market as well as the European market. If we look, and I'm going to specifically zoom in on the co-location market. So when we look at the European numbers now, the growth of the co-location market is a pretty robust. So 34% of enterprises today, as of actually June 2021, not using co-location services, stated that they plan to use them within 1 year. And we have almost half of the interviewees already been in the game. If we look at the usage pattern, to see if there's anything, let's say, differentiating between the size of the companies, I would say there is not really any dramatic changes in terms of we are using or we will be using between large corporations and the small and medium-sized enterprises. Another thing is that there's virtually no difference between corporates and SMEs in terms of which co-location services they actually currently use. When we ask the question, what are the top 3 co-location services used by your organization? I mean, again, it's very much about cloud exchange / marketplace platform. And it's very much about managed services in its full scope. And of course, interconnection to cloud service providers is another important service clients or corporations and SMEs are looking for. And we've actually put in a 4th type of service. It's the co-location power spacing, cooling, etc., which is also widely used. Now, let's have a look at some specific US data we have in terms of the industry outlook. And here we talk about interconnection services. And when we ask the question, what is the current and future plans for adoption of third-party cloud interconnection services? We found out that business and professional services are very, very much followed by financial services. And it's, here we see that the numbers differ a little bit from the slide I showed you a few seconds earlier. But we see the business professional services, financial services, transport, and government in the US are currently big users of interconnection services. And then there's a little bit of a gap to healthcare industry and other industries. When we ask the question, what are the top 3 reasons for really migrating to a third-party co-location provider? Business agility and interconnection are really the prime reasons to adopt these services. But if you look closely at this survey and this slide, we also have to bear in mind that the other other surveys, there is also a security reason as a really main reason for migrating to a third-party co-location provider. Some of you may ask, what do you want to say with this little red arrow on the top right? Well, the interesting thing is it shows the trend. If we look at 2020, only 18% actually said that business agility is a key reason for migrating, while in 2021, we can see how that number has shot up to 40%, closely followed by access to multiple cloud providers. It's very much about leverage the sustainable co-location facilities, power sources, etc. And a 13% at the very bottom saying we don't have enough of internal expertise, and therefore it's an important reason for migrating to a third-party co-location provider. So by these numbers, I try to give you some sort of an insight or let's say an opening to this webinar. And I'm handing over to Bill Fennick from Interxion to take on from here. Bill, the word on the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. I'm going to share my screen as well. Okay, you need to. Yeah, thanks. Let me just share my screen. Excuse me a second. So my name is Bill Fennick. I'm Vice President Enterprise for Interxion, a digital realty company. And let me, hopefully everybody can hear me. We were having a few technical problems earlier. Okay. I just wanted to introduce briefly Interxion and digital realty as a company, and then we're going to get right into the panel discussion with the participants there. But once again, my name is Bill Fennick. Just as an introduction to Interxion and digital realty. Digital realty bought Interxion, so we were acquired by Interxion approximately 2 years ago. So in Europe, we're still using the Interxion name. However, digital realty is the overall global company, and as you can see, we're in or across the globe, I guess, in the U.S., fairly strong in Europe, and in Asia Pac now. When I say fairly strong in Europe, whoops, excuse me, go this way. Interxion is actually the leader in Europe in terms of cloud compute and cloud network on-ramps. And, you know, I noticed George's IDC presentation talking a lot about the whole connected communities and the interconnection of users. And that's very much what we have focused on over the years, is to ensure that we have the richest in terms of the connected communities, and focused a lot not only on the cloud and service providers in that respect, but on quite a few of the verticals. Today, we're going to delve much more into financial services as one of our strong verticals here. So I'm really excited to get into that panel. But just a couple other things. From a European perspective, we have an extremely large and strong footprint. As you can see from the Nordics, with Stockholm and Copenhagen as two of the key interconnectivity hubs in the Nordics, as well as the whole Benelux area of Amsterdam and Brussels on down to further into Southern Europe. So once again, we're really, really strong on the interconnectivity world. I quite liked the caption in George's slides around the whole agility and business agility. That's something that we've thought about many times, about the interconnectivity of various, not only vendors, but of various partners and actually customers as well. So it's a chief focus of ours on that. One of the ways we really help our customers is through something we call platform digital, which encompasses very much not only the coverage that I've displayed and the connectivity, but to ensure that you have capacity, or more and more what we're talking edge data centers. The edge data centers where you need it, where either you have other business partners, where you have the eyeballs, so your actual customers, or indeed if you have latency requirements. And control, we talk about a lot as well. That's why we're very happy to have Peter on the call here, who's the Chief Security Officer, who'll introduce himself in a moment. But we talk a lot about control and around cyber control. We know that's one of the large themes. And another theme that George pointed out, which is very much top of mind for us, as well as everybody hopefully across the globe these days, is the whole sustainability and ESG. Very much top of mind with us. We're working with many customers on various solutions around the whole ESG or sustainability, particularly around the HPC AI world, which we'll get into a little bit more in the actual panel discussion. So I'm really looking forward to that. What I'm going to do now is invite both Peter and Adrian on. And if I can ask you guys, please, to introduce yourselves, and then we can get on to the actual panel discussion itself. But perhaps, Adrian, we can start with you. Would you mind introducing Aquis Exchange and yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Bill. So my name's Adrian. I run product management and tech licensing at Aquis. Aquis was originally founded as a pan-European equities exchange about 10 years ago or so now. We built everything up in-house ourselves in terms of matching engine, market surveillance platforms, having worked with a lot of the legacy providers in the past. So now we run 2 pan-European equities markets. We're sort of somewhere between 5 and 6% of total traded equities in Europe. In addition to that, we also have a small and mid-cap listings exchange in the UK, and then we also license out the technology platform in terms of matching engine and market surveillance.
Thank you, Adrian, and this is going to be really exciting to talk about some of the latest news in this. But before we get on to that, Peter, could you please introduce yourself and also your company?
Yes, so my name is Peter Cooper. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Fidesmo. Fidesmo was founded a few years ago when our founders realized that there was an enormous challenge connecting service providers who wanted to provide contactless services, the things that we're all getting used to now with contactless credit cards and so forth, with the billions of consumers in the world who want to use their own devices. So we're talking about a lot more than just payments. We're talking about identity, access. We're doing projects related to central bank digital currencies. So we're quite interested in the way that you can actually secure such services. And we've got a whole bunch of different regulators who are quite interested in the work that we do. So yeah, please, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, no, as am I. And just to say once again, Adrian and Peter, but both really valued customers of ours at Interaction, and really looking forward to this. But Adrian, perhaps I can start with you. Some big news coming out actually of Las Vegas yesterday, of all places. And I'm not sure if gambling has anything to do with this one, but NASDAQ came out with a very large or big announcement about AWS and their joint partnership or collaboration. And then it was hot on the heels of the CME, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, coming out a few weeks ago with their collaboration with Google. I know Aquis has done quite a bit in this space as well. Perhaps, firstly, I wonder if you can comment a little bit on some of these latest announcements in this perhaps accelerated adoption of cloud, I guess, in many respects, and perhaps give a bit of your perspective on that, on what Aquis is doing around cloud adoption.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Bill. So I think it's very important to know, as an industry, we are quite clearly focused on where the future is, how things are going to move into cloud, and how we can best leverage on cloud technologies in the future. Aquis is, at the forefront of cloud adoption for matching engine technologies and market surveillance. People may have seen that last year we conducted a fairly large proof of concept with both Singapore Exchange SGX and AWS to look at putting high regulatory grade matching into standardized sort of cloud environments. Now, the good thing that came out of that is that we have proven that technically there is the capability to run these sort of things in a cloud environment. However, what we do also see is that we run multiple exchanges in an on-prem manner. As you know, we're customers of yours, and we use Interxion along with other data center providers. But what we really see is that although the cloud is technically capable, there are limitations. Some of those limitations are geared around things such as latency. Some of them are geared around whether the overall framework is ready to accept major institutional participation in cloud-based environments. And I think we've obviously been quite closely following NASDAQ and CME and all of the news that's coming out around these. And I think it's interesting because from our perspective, the work that we did last year was very much focused on what we would refer to as sort of standardized cloud. So we're not talking about taking Amazon branded servers and putting them into our data centers, which is I think a lot of what the NASDAQ announcement was geared towards. I mean, that has a place, of course, but that's geared more towards private cloud environments and things of this nature. And of course, where you control a lot more of the overall technology stack, you can get better results than you can using stock EC2 instances in AWS data centers and things of that nature. So we're definitely focused on how we can do things in the right way. I think one of the main advantages of the cloud is the elastic nature of what it provides. And I'm not convinced that simply taking additional cloud-based servers and putting them in an on-prem environment is really sort of making the best use of what the cloud is going to provide in the future. So it's quite an interesting dynamic to watch.
No, indeed. And I mean, most people understand around the whole low latency and how low latency trading and how exchanges really are in many respects on-prem for that. But Peter, maybe I can turn to you. I mean, so everybody once again understands why exchanges are on-prem, but I know that you guys sit with us in Stockholm and also in Madrid, perhaps, and you're obviously a payments provider, which has a different latency configuration, so to speak, or requirement. Let's put it that way. Perhaps better said requirement. But why is that? Why have you guys not gone completely into the cloud? And maybe you can describe a little bit what your architecture looks like. And then I wouldn't mind if you delved a little bit into the security side of that as well, being that's your expertise.
For sure. So I think the interesting question is, what is latency's impact on customer retention and payments? And of course, people are quite sensitive to network latency. If you're in the queue at the supermarket, it's very easy to get a bit irritated if someone's payment is not going through in front of you. You can imagine that actually multiplies quite a lot the more people you have. We're not totally in line in the payments. My previous employer that's Adyen. At Fidesmo, we actually provision the devices. So that makes us a little bit less sensitive to this kind of timing issues. But even there, consumers and mass personalizers find it as they're sort of configuring the devices. If you're staring at sort of like one of those spinning icons on your phone while you're provisioning a new service, you're not a particularly happy consumer either. So being close to the customer is quite important for us. The main reason, though, that we're actually in your data centers, and I think I'm going to join up 2 and 3 a little bit, is that we're in the payment space. And as everyone who has ever dealt with payments online knows. PCI and the thicket of standards, industry standards around this, can be quite difficult to navigate, and maybe not always perhaps as oriented at enterprise needs as so much as the payment network's needs. So our particular role in the process, which is to embed secrets into devices, is something that they actually have very strict rules about, because if you imagine traditionally all payment methods for credit cards were actually on mag stripes or on chips, physically embedded on painted cards. So they were actually factories, and they wanted to make sure that these factories were safe. So all of the standards around this kind of stuff, even though we do it all over the air, the requirements are that this actually happens inside a cage. And you might have seen our cage in Stockholm, because you're based there. It's quite a fortress. And this is all to do with this very special requirements around making sure that those plastic cards were produced safely. But it also happens to be quite useful in sort of assuring that this mass of secrets that is deployed into thousands, millions, or billions of devices are not going to leak accidentally. So our profile looks a lot more like national security loads in terms of physical security than maybe some other businesses. And so our security architecture really is that we need to physically secure these secrets in hardware roots of trust. There's a fancy word for hardware security modules. They're the ridiculously expensive devices that you buy from a fairly small number of authorized manufacturers around the world, who can give certain kinds of hard guarantees that even if the device is physically captured by an opponent, they cannot extract the keys from it. But even there's layers of defense up to and including all of the services that a data center provider or a colo provider actually provides us with, dual control, the airlocks, the video surveillance, the physical walkthroughs, but also some of the special custom stuff that Interxion has done for us in our data center co-locations.
Let me ask, Peter, if I can just stay with you for a moment. So, I mean, that's really good. You talked about the cage, and you can actually tap on the tin that you have inside that cage, so to speak. What about hybrid, though? Are you guys looking at all to adopt this hybrid type of environment that many people talk about, where you use the cloud for certain workloads, and then you use clearly what you've described, your cage and the physical security for your, if you will, your vault-like workloads? But what is your perspective on the hybrid?
Well, we are actually a hybrid cloud provider as well. So we're actually a cloud provider. We're effectively providing a trust layer in the cloud. The fact that it connects hardware devices, little chips in telephones or in rings, through to a hardware security module, it's all done over the internet. So it feels like a cloud service. Parts of our offering are, of course, cloud-based. It doesn't make sense to have all of our ticketing systems running on our own metal, for example. So we're inherently, we use services that exist in the cloud, and our service is, in fact, a hybrid in that way. We actually use physical co-locations intelligently and with a sort of a fixed focus on making sure that when our auditors come through, they can kick the metal, and they can kick the metal on a very specifically defined set of workloads and a specifically defined set of systems and data. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons, not just from the PCI side of the world. Electronic ID requires certain kinds of national security organizations being involved, certain kinds of monetary instruments to do with central bank digital currencies will involve rather intense assessments of the physical security at the bottom of all of this. And it's very hard to do in a cloud. A cloud is someone else's computer, but if no one can actually point to the rack and the location, then it's quite difficult if you're a regulated entity or you're a regulator to be particularly comfortable about that, because where does the buck stop? Who is end responsible? Who can actually tell me that the back door of the data center that's hosted by someone else, where my workload temporarily was left open? That's really hard for someone who's got end responsibility to, like, I don't know, the European Commission or a national cabinet to actually sign off on.
Yeah, well, That's fascinating, and I'm sure, Adrian, you and your organization are know the regulators quite well as well. And I know, I spoke with both of you guys earlier around some of the EU regulations, particularly DORA, which is around, I mean, in a nutshell, operational resilience and sitting there. But Adrian, perhaps you can discuss a little bit about some of the steps that your exchange takes in terms of operational resiliency, and some of the other compliance challenges, or hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so DORA is, front of mind for a lot of the industry at the moment, and obviously, the text that has been published is currently in draft form from the European Commission. Aquis took part in the ESMA call for evidence that occurred earlier on this year. And I think the right questions are being asked, right? And the bottom line is, the sort of the equities and trading and landscape is quite well established. We know what we need to do in a physical on-prem type of environment to really meet all of our obligations from a compliance and regulation perspective, and really a large part of that involves us relying on companies like yours, Bill, and making sure that we have the full audit trail where perhaps we don't want to build a huge data center ourselves, but that we can be assured of the security and the integrity of the systems that we run. Because ultimately, yes, of course, people talk about high frequency trading and things like this, but it's all of our pensions and our personal funds that are sitting there trading through these platforms, right? So it's very important that everything has been built up to be highly resilient. We don't have single providers for pretty much anything in terms of where we put stuff. We use multiple data centers from different providers. We use lease lines from different providers, and there is a very mature digital infrastructure that underpins most of global financial markets. And really, we're sort of we and the entire industry is grappling with, what does that look like in a cloud future? Now, it's interesting because obviously we run our own markets, but we also license technology. We've signed up a few clients this year to take our matching engines and market surveillance systems. Some of them are actually going cloud native, right? But others are not. So where we talk about on-prem and where we talk about hybrid and where we talk about cloud, I think it's quite clear that there is a sort of a bit of an evolution that's taking place here. The ones that are looking at going pure cloud, they're startup markets. They don't have any sort of established presence with major tier one banks that are trading using high frequency trading systems on them or anything like this. And they're sort of sitting there going, well, why do I want to spend $500,000 or $1 million on buying a ton of hardware when I can do this in the cloud from the get-go? For Aquis, however, it's a different game, and it's not just us. Obviously, you look at any of the established markets, major banks, major HFT firms are not just going to give up all of their data center footprint and say, okay, fine, let's put everything in the cloud. So we're focused on a few things. One is, I would say, we're looking at, and we use the cloud today, but what I'd say is we use kind of second order functions really are taking place in the cloud. So our website runs out of the cloud, and, and we may host some reference data and things like that. All the high frequency stuff, of course, it's all on-prem, right? What we will probably see in the future from established markets is a hybrid approach where there will still be, a significant data center footprint. That footprint will be around, client connectivity, market data, clearing connections and things of this nature. And, more of the things that sit behind that may slowly start to move up to the cloud. But, that doesn't mean that big investment bank one is going to just move everything into AWS or GCP or anything tomorrow.
It's a long journey. I think we can all say that the current environment was not built in a day, nor will the next environment be built in a day. But Peter, I wanted to go to you though, because DORA, which once again for people who are not aware is very much, I think, very much as a directive right now around European research, but I know cybersecurity is also, so it's operational resilience, and then cybersecurity is one of the highlights there. I wonder if you could perhaps comment a little bit about perhaps what you've contributed, you as your company, I mean, or the payments industry in general, have contributed to some of that conversation around cybersecurity.
Yeah, so DORA is quite clearly part of the evolution out of the EU Network and Information Security Directive. It's quite interesting, the trend that the European regulators created to try and create a level playing field and a set of standards around cybersecurity and effectively critical infrastructure in Europe. And DORA is quite clearly a further evolution of that. One of the three lead European entities involved is the European Banking Association, Authority, sorry, who are the standard setters for much of the banking and payments world. There's a couple of others involved. And what's super interesting is that they've sort of evolved the EBA's perspective on cloud outsourcing. And when I say cloud outsourcing, it's not just the usual suspects. It's also businesses like mine. We are a cloud service for other financial services entities. And so the interesting thing is that the DORA model is to really increase the perimeter of regulation. It increases the compliance obligations ultimately of everyone providing critical services into critical infrastructure, including the financial industry. So it's going to increase the set of obligations, even if you don't believe that you're directly impacted by DORA, but your customers will be. And then they're going to be passing through questions and compliance obligations around your operational resiliency, including cybersecurity, including whether or not you've got control of your services, even in the case of a further supplier like a cloud hosting provider going down. So it's, I think, a step change for even SMEs located within the European Union. If you're targeting any mid-sized or larger business as your customers, DORA is going to have impact on what you do and why you do it. And so cybersecurity, unfortunately, that's still going to be a bit of a patchwork quilt, because the current DORA model is delegated legislation. So each country will decide which industries are in scope and perhaps some of the controls that need to be in place. But the general principles will be common across the European Union. And if you've got customers in those critical segments, you're going to be in scope. And you're going to have to think a little bit about what your story is and how you're going to actually assure that if your own service providers go down, that you're able to continue service to your critical customers.
I imagine that we can speak about DORA for the next couple hours, but let's. I'm going to push on to another theme that also touches very much maybe on hybrid solution, and maybe Peter, we can start with you a little bit on this one again. Around maybe AI, ML, and so the whole artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's being adopted across the board, I think one can almost say these days, right? In a level of sophistication that is perhaps more so in some enterprises versus others. But what is the feeling in the payment industry, or perhaps with your company itself? I mean, the adoption of it, is it around providing, if you will, or creating customer data and adding to the customer data, or to understand peaks and troughs, and give us a bit of color from your perspective.
So my experience is really from pan-European, now global bank Adyen, and their use of machine learning and artificial intelligence was targeted in 3 or 4 different areas. The most important is, of course, risk reduction, and that's also hyper-regulated. AML, countering the financing of terrorism. It's no longer possible at the volumes that real financial services businesses operate on to manually review every transaction. So historic spreadsheet-based algorithms that were provided by the big 4 consultancies, they're no longer fit for purpose. And increasingly, the penalties are getting quite high. I live in a country in the Netherlands where one bank was fined 900 million euros for failing to properly apply AML requirements. So it's quite a concern for businesses and financial services businesses and payment businesses and banks especially. So the question is, how do you do that? And it turns out that machine learning tools actually give you a leg up. They allow you to, it's not easy to do, but you're much more confident of your compliance. If you have a big push into machine learning, you're going to catch a lot more stuff and you can report things to the appropriate regulator. The second thing is to provide more customer insights. One of the challenges is that in our current world, especially in retail, I understand that a bit more than 50 cents in the euro of every new euro in online commerce is going to Amazon. That means that if you're a non-Amazon business, you're really competing hard for business, and insights into your customers' payment behavior and what's likely to work and what's likely not to work is critical, and especially in the buy now, pay later space. Risk management from that consumer perspective, but also understanding what is going to drive your conversion. This is what machine learning is built for. So hugely valuable in that kind of space. At Fidesmo, we're a bit more of an infrastructure provider. It's less critical for us to have those kinds of insights, although we do some of these techniques, but it's not a game changer simply because we don't have any real competition in our segment. So we're quite a unique player, and it's a very nice place to be right now. But for organizations who are in very competitive market positions, they need it. You need to be applying these techniques. Otherwise, you will be run over by the people who are using these techniques.
Well, I'm wondering, Adrian, because infrastructure player is how Peter more or less labeled Fidesmo, which nobody's going to disagree with. We know that the banking and financial services use a lot of AI, but what about an infrastructure player like an exchange? Yeah. Aquis. I mean, is that, are you guys kind of touching the void on any of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. We're so, one of the things that we're looking at is, we put some press out about this, I think, in the last year or so. From our side of things, we're obviously for the trading and the matching of orders and bids and offers itself, it's a pretty vanilla sort of implementation. We don't need any AI for that. However, a lot of, where we talk about regulation, surveillance, compliance, and all these sorts of things, this is fundamentally a big data problem, right? And as Peter alluded to, the number of orders, the number of trades, the number of modifies, the number of cancels are exponentially growing in this industry globally all the time. What was traditionally a sort of a rules-based approach to market surveillance and market abuse, which says, I'll set some parameters, and when certain things occur in the market and it triggers those parameters, then an alert will be generated and somebody looks at it, right? That is the current model in many respects. But what we're focused on is actually, what does that become? And I think the real key there is that we know that if you're a trading firm and you develop an algorithm and it makes you a ton of money, guess what? That competitive edge is going to get competed away by the nature of the market. And what that means is that we know that as these algorithms and as these trading practices evolve, a simple one-size-fits-all rule-based approach to trying to analyze, is there market abuse going on here, is not really going to be the be-all and end-all of how can we see if there's something untoward occurring. So Aquis has partnered with a university in the UK, and it comes under actually a UK government research grant project to really look at how do we bring machine learning into the market surveillance world. And now it's a very tricky topic, actually, because although we say, we have tons of data, right? Exchanges in general generate huge amounts of data every day. What we also know, however, is that it can't be a black box. okay, there still needs to be somebody sitting there on the end that makes a call that says, actually, you know what, there is something going on here, and I'm going to refer this to my regulator. So machine learning, we view it as a support tool, if you like, to be able to say, don't just look at the rules-based approach, look at, you know, general trading patterns, try to identify where there's something really different that is occurring that maybe we haven't seen before, and flag it up. And, you know, maybe it's used to refine near misses and all of this sorts of things that happen. But it really is about a supporting tool still to humans who sit there and make a decision at the end of the day and say, no, there's something going on, I need to talk to my regulator.
Well, that's ultimately, I think, what all this is that either a machine or a human being can make an intelligent decision. That's what, but you know, but you guys have spoken a lot about ultimately data, and data is providing so much insight. You know, we at Digital Realty actually built a data gravity index, because the amount of data being created today is unprecedented. You know, one hears the quotes all the time, but it really is unprecedented. Adrian, you and I, of course, in our previous careers had to deal a lot with data from a market data, financial data perspective. And, you know, we saw the growth happening continuously. So, and this is where we've quantified that to some degree of which cities produce the most data in terms of London, Tokyo, you know, unsurprising financial services cities. I want to tap just a little bit in the few remaining minutes into the future, though, because what we're talking about, and ever so eloquently, and just quite honestly, guys, I could listen to this for a couple of hours. You guys are really articulate in how you express, you know, what's happening in the market. But you know, we're still talking about very binary nature here of computing, right? We're talking about ones and zeros. And George, I know that IDC have poked a little bit the beast here in terms of quantum computing. And I'm just curious, you know, I think you were talking about maybe more investment happening in this notion that we've been talking about for 30 years, but it looks like it's becoming ever so close to maybe being applied in a more practical sense. But George, perhaps can you give us a bit of insight on some of the investment the industry is doing around this quantum computing?
Before I give you some interesting or boring numbers, let me state that in the Worldwide Cloud 2022 predictions, we have a prediction which says as follows: by 2025, nearly 50% of all, let's say, accelerated infrastructure for performance-intensive computing, which obviously includes artificial intelligence, big data analysis, etc., will be cloud-based, as these systems are increasingly integrated with enterprise software. And obviously that has both a business and as well as an IT impact. I mean, obviously, you know, cloud-based PIC, performance intense computing, that's going to be shifting spending from a capex to an opex point of view. And the business impact, I mean, we can all look at them, but there's one interesting thing here. When we look at the business impact, we think that the usage will follow some sort of a three-stage waves. That first we will do some isolated scientific problems solved through quantum computing. Then there will be some isolated business problems. And then boom, it's going to be a mainstream, it's really going to be a mainstream usage for everything, or virtually everything related to AI and big data. And now the numbers, I mean, if we look, I've got a funkily graph in front of me, but if we look at 2020 to 2025 in terms of worldwide quantum computing spending, the total compounded annual growth rate is 53.5%. And this is really a hockey stick. And that includes everything, you know, quantum computing as a service, the core, but also enabling and adjacent services around it. So it's really like a hockey stick. I hope I will not be wrong if I say that the mainstream usage will come very quickly. we will not only see quantum computing,
Yeah,
solving isolated
well, that's what
topics.
the information you sent me. I was quite amazed at that, Kega. And of course, Peter is going to turn cryptography on its head. Adrian, I have no idea what it's going to do to trading if all of a sudden we're doing that. But we do have a few questions, but I want you guys to comment as well. Peter, perhaps you first on the what's a cryptologist to do then, right? Is that person out of a job, or is that job just being made incredibly more difficult?
It's much more interesting, I think, if you're a full-time cryptographer. There's teams working on this kind of stuff. From an industrial perspective, there is an equation that is very important, and it's x plus y is greater than z. And that's the moment where we, as an industry, should get very worried. X is the amount of time to get something that is quantum proof in terms of cryptography. Y is how long we're going to have whatever we currently have in the market, still in the market. And if that's those two things take longer than the development of that kind of quantum crypto supremacy thing, then we're in trouble. So typically your debit card is valid for about 4 or 5 years. So we have an issue that if RSA is broken, we expect it plus or minus 2031 or so, we need to standardize the replacement for RSA, which is an encryption system that is the most likely first one to get broken, really in the next 2 or 3 years. And actually that's what's happening right now. We're just waiting for the right candidates to solidify, but that's happening. And then, of course, it takes time to get that baked into semiconductors, and we've got a semiconductor shortage and all of these kinds of things. And then you need to get them into people's hands and in use before the old devices get too dangerous to use. So, yeah, it's very exciting times for the industry. There's a lot of prep work already done. So, very smart people are very, very busy with this kind of stuff. The secret actually is that debit and credit cards, the stuff that we use, things like Apple Pay, these are not nearly as vulnerable to quantum computing as public key certificates that we use to secure the web, because we share secrets. In fact, we don't do public-private key cryptography on those cards. So the cards themselves, the payment authorizations, that's less of a risk, but there's going to be big changes to the way that our computers do certificates.
Well, Adrian, we know that the two big emotions that drive the city of London and New York are greed and fear. And I'm hearing kind of both, more so fear, but greed as well. But I don't know if you have any comments on that, or I can see the exchange, the whole low latency world being completely demolished, eviscerated. But maybe not. I don't know if you have any comments or anything like that.
I mean, well, quantum is very interesting. Obviously, we keep an eye on it. It's not something that we are directly sort of involved in ourselves. I think that there are a lot of side effects, though, of what happens in that space on us. Yeah, and I think there's a few things to keep in mind. I mean, obviously, the big one is security, right? And security on everything, whether it's payments, whether it's trading, whether it's your email or whatever it happens to be. And we know that there are organizations in the world today that are gathering as much data as they can on the basis that quantum supremacy will be reached, and we will be able to do something with this data then, right? And I think what Aquis and what market infrastructures tend to look at is, how do we secure ourselves? How do we secure our businesses? Obviously, a lot of that today is geared around, we don't have retail trading on our markets directly, right? We have institutions, we have brokerages, we have air gaps networks and things of this nature that are sort of one of the multiple lines of defense that exist to help us. But what we also know is that where I talked earlier about AI and machine learning, and the ability to analyze market movements and the ability to figure out ahead of other people what you can do and how you can achieve things, quantum will move that dial along. The entire industry is, of course, quite conscious of that, and trying to make sure that it's the new race to zero, right? Which is that before it was race to zero in terms of milliseconds, and then it was microseconds, and now it's nanoseconds, and this is the new frontier, right? It's like, how quickly can I get my algorithms to understand what's going on and take advantage of it on a market better than everybody else?
Fantastic.
So yeah, I mean, it's I don't think exchanges get destroyed. I think there is a real danger if you look at crypto and some of the crypto markets where they're readily available to retail investors. They're unregulated. A lot of the blockchain is based upon the inability of the world to overpower the compute capacity and things of that nature. So I think crypto is very heavily focused on that. And of course, what we know is that the equities markets are still fairly traditional. We have custodians and digital Fort Knoxes all over the place. But the crypto world is, everything is the blockchain, right? Your clearer is the blockchain, your custodian is the blockchain. And the second that can be overpowered, well, there's going to be some very rich people. So,
thank you, Adrian. It's all. Listen, we have a few more minutes left. We have had a couple of questions that have come in, though, so I want to make sure we address them for the listeners. And we have one from Matt here. Peter, I think this is directed at you, perhaps, or maybe I'm wrong, but it says, please elaborate a little bit on the challenges EBA regulation and personal data challenge, the architecture, and what you do to address regulation and define challenges. I guess that's the question. Should I reread it, or did you get the question? You got it?
I got it. Yeah. So the EBA regulations, on the face of it, quite high level, but it's how they get translated by your lead regulator, typically a local central bank, and that's where the challenges start popping up. The anxiety levels. One of the things that we've noticed is this cloud outsourcing thing is interpreted as adding a new level of risk to your local central bank regulating you as a financial entity. So previously they could kind of maybe ignore it, but now the EBA has actually put it in black and white as a risk. So they have to deal with it. And then they start sort of doing surveys of their regulated entities in their market. And then they realize everyone's using the same two cloud providers for critical functionality. And they get very, very anxious about this concentration risk. So we're seeing this kind of stuff popping up. And then how do you make sure that you're not seen as another risk factor in their industry regulation? And it's more than just the cloud outsourcing, but cloud outsourcing is, I think, one of the biggest areas where most of us are impacted. In terms of data privacy, this is not a European thing so much as a global thing. We're seeing more and more data sovereignty. I was involved in a project about a year ago to do with bringing a bank live in India. And some of you may have heard that one of the global credit card schemes is no longer permitted to issue credit cards in India anymore because they ignored the local regulators' requirements that the data about Indian data subjects should only be stored in India. And that's quite shocking because that really disrupts the competitive market enormously for that player because they can no longer open new accounts. So data sovereignty means that you actually have to be located quite often much closer to your customers, not in sort of vague cloud environments, but in very specific environments. They could be local clouds, but you need to be able to show regulators that there is no accidental leakage of this data from one region to another out of their jurisdiction. So this is such a great question because this is so hot and this is so real. And for most of us, we built businesses and technical infrastructures based on this idea that the world was a little bit flat. There was one internet, there was one set of connectivity, but it turns out that, and I don't blame the regulators for this. When you actually give a sort of like a subpoena to a company to provide evidence, and they say, well, actually we're based in Ireland, we're not going to help you. at a certain point, you're going to say, well, data sovereignty is a critical requirement for us to maintain financial system stability, for example, or to fight fraud, or any of those other things. Yeah, I think it's such these topics, it changes the way we build our businesses, both organizationally and technically.
I think they're fascinating. I think they're fascinating. This, you know, the concentration risk as well in terms of that. Now, Adrian, I know you mentioned you had a quick comment. We have 1 more minute left, but Adrian, maybe you, you know, you had a quick comment about that as well prior. How do you guys either avoid it, or do you see it happening on a daily basis, so to speak?
Definitely, yeah, and I think, you know, the way that we avoid it traditionally is like we said, you know, we take multiple providers, diverse routes for everything that we can. But I think it's interesting because obviously what I would say is that both DORA, EBA guidelines on critical outsourcing functions, you know, there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of relevant areas in both of these. And you know, one of the clients that we signed up this year actually has required quite a bit of language from a contractual perspective to make sure that, you know, they are meeting what they see as their obligation under European regulation around, you know, how do we make sure that we've got an exit strategy here? How do we make sure that we're not 100% reliant on, you know, whether it's AWS or Google or anyone like that? And I think that, you know, what we will see is that the more there will be greater contractual structures that will be built up around, you know, mandating multi-cloud, mandating, you know, what is your exit strategy from critical service providers, you know, how much will it cost you to get out of these, what is your time frame to migrate between providers, and things of this nature. So, you know, it's a very interesting landscape.
No, indeed it is. Indeed it is. Well, listen, Peter Cooper from Fidesmo, Adrian Ip from Aquis Exchange. I almost feel like I'm closing down Desert Island Discs for the day. I could listen to you guys for another hour. This was really, really interesting. George, your input from IDC was excellent as well. But it's really up to me to say thanks so much, guys. This was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed listening to what everybody had to say. I learned a lot from it, and I just think it's really, really good. So thank you so much, guys.
Thanks very much for your time.
And we're going to end the webinar right here. But thank you, George. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Peter. Really, really, really good. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.